Let's break it down straight from the hill to your hometown. No spin, no hype, just facts we find. AI's on the case, no truth left behind. Laws are written, deals are made. Who's got your back, who's throwing shade? We cut through the noise, decode the text, keeping it real. Congress in context, Congress in context, shining the light, breaking it down so you know what's right. Policies, votes, who's working for you? We bring the facts, the power is you.
Welcome to Congress in Context, the deep dive, where we really unpack what's happening in the legislative process using the Congressional Record.
Yeah, that official transcript of everything said and done.
Exactly. And today, we're digging into the excerpts from Wednesday, May 21st, 2025.
It was quite a day, based on this record.
Our mission really is to guide you through this stuff, pull out the key debates, the important decisions, so you feel pretty well informed about what went down on Capitol Hill that day.
Think of it as making sense of the sometimes dense language and procedure.
Right. It's your shortcut to understanding the forces shaping policy. Okay, let's unpack this day in Congress.
So, starting with the House of Representatives, the record shows it was called to order, well, pretty late, after a recess around 11 p.m.
11 o'clock at night. That usually means something big is happening, doesn't it?
Often does. And in this case, yeah, the major action highlighted was getting ready to consider H.R. 1.
H.R. 1. And the source here calls it the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. That name alone suggests it's significant.
It certainly does. And, to even get it to the floor, they first had to deal with House Resolution 436. Mrs. Houchin brought that up from the Rules Committee.
Ah, the Rules Committee.
Yeah.
They basically set the playbook for how a bill gets debated, right?
Exactly. They set the terms. And this resolution, HRS 436, laid out a very specific path for H.R. 1.
Okay, so what kind of path? What did it actually do?
Well, it was really designed to speed things up. First, it made H.R. 1 immediately in order for consideration.
Okay.
And crucially, it waived all points of order against considering the bill itself.
Wait, waived points of order. So basically, members couldn't use procedural objections to stop it right at the start.
That's the gist of it, yeah. It smoothed it the way procedurally. It also adopted a specific version of the bill. It's called an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Like a replacement version.
Pretty much a full rewrite. The one from the Rules Committee print 119-3 with some tweaks.
So that specific version was what they were lining up to debate.
Yes. And that version was considered as read, meaning they skipped the formal reading aloud of the whole text.
Saves time, I guess.
Definitely. And then it also waived all points of order against the provisions inside that amended bill.
Wow. So no procedural challenges to the bill or what was in the bill.
Yeah.
Seems like they really wanted this moving.
They absolutely did. It also ordered the previous question to final passage. That's a House procedure that basically cuts off further debate and amendments.
And forces a final vote.
Right. Except for one specific type of motion, the motion to recommit. And debate was capped just 2 hours total, split between the Budget Committee and the Ways and Means Committee.
2 hours for what sounds like a massive bill. And I saw something about a specific spending rule being waived, too.
Yeah, Clause 5B of Rule X6I. That's a rule that usually requires spending increases or tax cuts to be offset elsewhere. Waiving it suggests, well, that this bill might not meet those standard budget rules.
Okay, so fast-track procedure, limited debate, waived budget rules. It makes sense that the record says there was a significant and often heated discussion around H.R. 1.
Oh, definitely.
What were the main arguments we saw from the opposition? What were they saying?
The language used by opponents was incredibly strong. Things like nothing short of theft.
Wow.
A terrible tax scam. A disgrace. They hit hard on the timing, too, debating it so late at night, claiming it lacked transparency, no town halls back in districts. Some called it political cowardice.
And they seemed really focused on kind of winners and losers.
Absolutely. A core argument was that the bill takes away earned benefits. They claimed it paid for huge tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires by, for instance, cutting SMP, the food assistance program.
Was there a specific number tied to that S&M cut?
Yeah, one figure mentioned was $300 billion cut from S&M.
$300 billion. And did this connect to worries about what states would have to do?
Yes, directly. Critics brought up concerns from governors saying states just couldn't afford the changes this bill would force on them.
Meaning states might have to.
Well, the fear was they'd be forced to cut benefits themselves, kick people off food aid entirely, or maybe even raise state taxes to cover the gap. The warning was pretty clear. It would increase hunger and dump tough choices onto state governments.
Healthcare was another huge flashpoint based on these excerpts.
Huge. Opponents described the potential impacts as, frankly, catastrophic. They predicted massive cuts to Medicaid,
Leading to what?
leading to potential hospital and nursing home closures and driving up healthcare prices for everyone else. They even cited specific state impacts, like New Jersey possibly losing $3.6 billion in federal Medicaid money.
And Medicare was mentioned too.
Claims of a $500 billion cut to Medicare were made by opponents.
Those are staggering figures. What about people actually losing their health insurance?
Opponents cited sources like the CBO predicting millions across the country losing coverage. The numbers thrown around were nearly 14 million Americans overall.
14 million.
With state specifics too, like 404,000 potentially in Pennsylvania, or even 14,000 in just one member's district. Plus warnings that thousands more would see their insurance premiums shoot up.
So the claim was it doesn't lower costs. It actually makes things worse, and is. Well, they use the word cruel.
They did. It was framed as actively harmful to average Americans.
I also noticed a really specific criticism. Something about a tax cut for silencers.
Yeah, that popped up. One member pointed to a tax cut if you buy firearm silencers and called it bizarre within the context of this broader bill. It shows how critics were seizing on specific details.
Did the criticism broaden out to the whole economy?
It did. One member called the bill an insult to every American who works for a living. Another went further, alleging Republicans were actively crashing the economy, driving America toward a recession.
And that argument about wealth, about who benefits, were there numbers attached to that?
Yes, the narrative was stark. Makes the rich richer, the poor poorer, boosts billionaires, cuts aid for, kids, seniors, people with disabilities, veterans, working folks.
Specific examples.
They contrasted an alleged $81,500 tax cut for a millionaire with what they called a crushing $5 billion tax increase on people earning under $30,000. And there were allegations of tricks and shady dealings to specifically benefit wealthy allies or family members.
And that budget rule waiver we talked about earlier, did opponents link that to automatic cuts elsewhere?
They did. The argument was because the bill increases the deficit due to the tax cuts not being paid for, it triggers something called statutory PI. Pay as you go. It basically forces automatic, across-the-board spending cuts to certain programs if legislation adds to the deficit.
Which programs would be hit?
Opponents listed critical ones: maternal, infant, and early childhood home visiting, promoting safe and stable families, the social services block grant. They even gave state examples, like Illinois facing potentially $41 million in cuts to the block grant, $18 million for home visiting, $13 million for Safe Families funding. Big impacts.
Okay, that's a powerful case from the opposition. So how did the bill's supporters respond? How did they frame H.R. 1?
Well, they painted a completely different picture, as you'd expect. They talked about delivering real, tangible results, launching the Great American Comeback.
Comeback how? What were the key claims?
Achieving America's energy dominance, securing the border, establishing fiscal certainty. They said it protects taxpayers, restores work requirements, ends waste, gets America back on track.
And was it tied to a specific political platform?
Oh, explicitly. Supporters stated it delivered on President Trump's agenda and fulfilled promises to the voters who sent them there. A big part of their argument was cutting rampant waste, fraud, and abuse.
So, tackling waste. How did that relate to programs like SNP and Medicaid, which the opponents said were being cut?
Supporters argued they were protecting those programs. Mr. Taylor, for instance, said cutting waste and fraud, specifically mentioning fraud by illegal immigrants or other fraudsters, actually preserves SNP and Medicaid for the truly vulnerable Americans who rely on them.
Interesting. So not cutting benefits, but cutting fraud to save the programs.
That was the core framing from supporters, yeah. A stark contrast. They called the bill America First and claimed it gives huge benefits to everyday working Americans.
What kinds of benefits did they point to for working folks?
They highlighted specific tax provisions. A Made in America auto tax break, supposedly to help jobs, no income tax on tips, no income tax on overtime pay.
The idea being more money in people's pockets.
That was the claim, yes. Putting money directly back into working Americans' pockets. They also mentioned funding for the Golden Dome defense system and argued the bill would propel America's economic performance overall.
How did they push back against the argument that this was just tax cuts for the rich?
One key argument was that the bill actually prevents a massive tax hike. They cited a figure of 22% on average Americans that would supposedly happen if current tax provisions expire.
So passing the bill avoids a tax increase.
That was their argument. They said being responsible stewards of tax dollars and rooting out waste isn't a scam. They cited analysis claiming the average working family would get a $1,300 tax cut.
Did they offer any data to counter the idea that benefits skewed towards the wealthy?
One member did. They cited analysis attributed to the Biden Treasury Department and the Tax Foundation, suggesting the previous Tax Cuts and Jobs Act actually resulted in a larger percentage tax rate drop for the bottom 50% of earners compared to the top 1%.
Using data from the other side's Treasury Department. Interesting.
Right. The implication was that H.R. 1 would continue that pattern, benefiting middle and lower earners proportionally more.
So just fundamentally opposing views on who this bill actually helps.
Completely. Supporters stressed they were delivering on promises to working families, small businesses, communities. They also flipped the script, talking about the negative impact if the bill didn't pass.
Like that tax hike they mentioned.
Exactly. One member calculated that the tax increase for a median income family of 4 in their district would be about $1,100, framing it as 6 weeks of groceries. A very tangible comparison.
And they mentioned manufacturing, too.
Yeah, provisions like 100% bonus depreciation were highlighted as ways to rebuild domestic manufacturing, create jobs, bring investment home, linking it all back to promises of a strong economy and manufacturing strength, and benefits for farmers in rural areas, too.
It is truly striking. The exact same bill described as both a cruel scam hitting the vulnerable and a necessary measure to help working families and prevent tax hikes.
That intense disagreement really defines the debate shown in these excerpts, and members on both sides brought it home, talking about effects in their specific districts, potential job losses versus potential job gains, funding cuts versus new investments.
And beyond all that heated rhetoric, the source material does give us a peek inside H.R. 1 itself. We don't see the whole bill, obviously, but the excerpts show just how massive this big, beautiful bill really is.
Yeah, the range is incredible. It touches on tons of tax stuff deductions, extensions, depreciation, opportunity zones, reporting thresholds, rules on CEO pay, even penalties linked to that COVID-era employee tax credit, the ERTC.
And it goes way beyond taxes, right? Agriculture.
Yep. Details on Senate utility allowances for seniors and disabled folks, setting crop loan rates years into the future, like 2026 to 2031, sugar policy, crop insurance funding, even a pilot program for poultry insurance.
Education policy was in there, too.
Specifics on student loan repayment for new loans starting mid-2026. Changes to workforce Pell Grants, making sure they don't cover grad degrees, rules for how colleges calculate prices.
And I saw something about K-12 scholarships and Trump accounts.
Right. Text related to K-12 scholarship tax credits, specifically barring government interference with private or religious schools involved. And yes, a mention of Trump accounts in that context, though the excerpts don't really explain what those are beyond the name.
Okay, quite the mix. What else? Healthcare, energy, border.
All in there.
Yeah.
Healthcare language about a Medicaid system to stop people enrolling in multiple states, and maybe introducing mandatory cost sharing for some Medicaid recipients down the line starting late 2028, though with exceptions. Rules for PBMs, the pharmacy benefit managers, including data reporting and requirements for Medicare drug plans.
In energy and environment.
Lots there, too. Taking back previously approved funding rescissions, limiting court challenges for project approvals, stuff about the oil and gas leasing fund, cutting coastal resilience funds, rules for timber contracts on federal lands, how states get paid from mineral leases, even a specific fee mentioned, a $1 million charge for exporting or importing natural gas outside of free trade agreements.
And specific dollar amounts listed for certain things.
Yeah, for border security, CBP vetting, fighting drug trafficking, especially fentanyl, and military spending to specific appropriations listed for things like Navy interceptors, anti-ship missiles, missile defense agency systems.
So H.R. 1 truly lives up to the one big beautiful bill name, at least in terms of scope. It touches almost everything. Before we leave the House, though, the record noted another vote happened, unrelated to H.R. 1.
That's right. The House actually passed S.J. Res. 31 that used the Congressional Review Act, the CRA mechanism, to overturn a recent EPA rule about classifying pollution sources under the Clean Air Act.
And how did that vote go?
It was close. Passed 216 to 212. Shows how tight things can be, even on these regulatory rollbacks.
Okay, let's switch over to the Senate now. The excerpts there paint a picture of a really complex procedural fight taking center stage.
Yeah, the big drama highlighted in the Senate record was another attempt to use the Congressional Review Act, this time for a Bill S. 1072, the target. California's Clean Air Act waivers.
Right, California has those special waivers letting it set tougher car emission standards than the federal government because of its unique air quality issues.
Exactly. It's had that authority for decades, going way back. And other states can choose to follow California's lead. This bill aimed to basically get rid of that authority.
But the fight wasn't just about the waivers. It was about how they were trying to overturn them. That sounds like the real flashpoint.
Precisely. This is where you really see Senate procedures shaping policy battles. Senators opposing the move pointed out something crucial. The Senate parliamentarian.
The nonpartisan rules expert.
Right. She had apparently advised both Democrats and Republicans that legislation trying to overturn these specific waivers did not qualify for the special fast-track process under the CRA.
Why does that matter? What's the significance of that advice?
Because CRA resolutions normally only need a simple majority, 51 votes, to pass the Senate, bypassing the usual 60-vote filibuster threshold. But if the parliamentarian says a bill doesn't qualify for that expedited path,
Then it needs 60 votes, like most other legislation.
that's the implication. So the conflict was this attempt to push the bill through with potentially just 51 votes, even though the parliamentarian had reportedly said it needed 60.
And how did opponents describe that move?
They used really strong procedural language, called it unprecedented, a procedural nuclear option, even totally akin to killing the filibuster. They argued the Senate has historically respected the parliamentarian's rulings on CRA matters and had never overruled her just to pass something with a simple majority in this way. They saw it as an end around the normal Senate process.
Okay, putting the procedure aside for a second, what were the arguments against overturning the waivers themselves? Why keep California's authority?
Opponents stressed California's long history, 60 years of leading on clean air, even before the main Clean Air Act of 1970. They emphasized the ongoing public health need, especially in places like LA and the San Joaquin Valley still struggling with smog. The warning was pretty direct. Getting rid of the waivers would make America hazy again.
Was there a connection made to specific industries?
One senator explicitly called the whole effort, both the policy and the procedural, push the fossil fuel industry in action. The argument was it's just a shortcut to sell more gasoline, increase pollution, and override states that want cleaner air.
And some historical comparisons were drawn to.
Yeah, a couple of senators mentioned past Republican leaders, like Reagan talking about environmental progress, or Nixon proposing major clean water funding, suggesting a shift in the party's approach over time.
Okay, now let's look at the actual Senate votes that were recorded. How do they fit into this procedural puzzle?
There were two key roll call votes listed. First, a motion related to appealing a ruling of the chair failed. 51 to 46. That was likely tied to the whole parliamentarian advice issue.
Okay, and the second vote?
Senator Thune made a point of order. He basically asserted that joint resolutions that do meet CRA requirements are entitled to the fast-track procedures. The presiding officer put that question to the whole Senate.
And the result?
Same vote breakdown. 51 yeas, 46 nays. So the Senate voted to sustain Thune's point of order.
So, they agreed with the general principle that CRA resolutions get fast-tracked. But how does that square with the earlier debate about the parliamentarian saying this specific California waiver bill didn't qualify?
That's the tricky part. The vote upheld the general rule, but the debate leading up to it highlighted the intense disagreement over whether this particular bill actually fit that rule in a way that allowed it to bypass the 60-vote threshold, given the parliamentarian's advice. It really underscores how these deep disagreements about Senate rules themselves can determine major policy outcomes. It's not just about the substance, it's about the process.
Absolutely. Beyond that big procedural fight, what else was going on in the Senate, according to these excerpts? Any other legislative action?
Well, lots of committee work was scheduled. The Judiciary Committee, for instance, had a hearing plan that included looking at AI-generated deepfakes.
Wow, tackling deepfakes, that's timely.
Definitely shows Congress trying to keep up with technology. The Small Business Committee was focused on the American manufacturing comeback, looking at specific bills. Energy and Natural Resources was vetting nominees for DOE and USGS. Foreign Relations had a packed agenda: quantum science, critical minerals, wrongful detentions, China strategy, Taiwan, the whole gamut.
Gives you a real sense of the sheer range of issues they cover.
Yeah, it really does.
And there was one specific Senate resolution mentioned that seemed pretty unusual.
Ah, yes. Senate Resolution 245, brought by Senator Blumenthal. It directly condemned what it called the financial entanglements of President Donald J. Trump with the Trump Pony meme coin.
A meme coin resolution in the Senate. What did it actually allege?
It claimed President Trump was getting fees from trading this coin through companies linked to him. It argued his promotion made the coin lucrative, even citing dollar figures, $350 million total, over $1 million since a specific event.
And how did the resolution characterize this activity?
It called it an unprecedented pay-to-play scheme, suggesting his position was being used to boost the coin's value and grant access. It also threw in an allegation about violating the Foreign Emoluments Clause related to a private jet from Qatar intended for his library foundation, claiming it would cost taxpayers millions. Important to stress, of course, these are allegations laid out in the resolution as captured in the record.
Understood. Okay, another topic that surfaced in the Senate excerpts was financial stability and climate risk.
Right. One senator raised concerns about climate change posing serious economic risks, specifically how it's disrupting the insurance market.
How so?
The worry is that properties in vulnerable areas become uninsurable, which then means you can't get a mortgage for them. They cited predictions of huge coastal property value losses, hundreds of billions nationwide, and potentially trillions globally in real estate markets.
And how does that ripple through the financial system?
It connects to bank stability. Loan-to-value ratios get messed up if property values crash. The senator mentioned warnings from international financial bodies and contrasted this with the administration's stance, which they characterized as calling climate change a hoax. They even referenced testimony from a major insurance CEO echoing these warnings about economic peril.
Tariff policy also got debated in the Senate.
They did. We saw arguments similar to the House. One side claimed tariffs were hurting small businesses. An example from Akron, Ohio was used, possibly forcing closures. The argument was big corporations can handle it, small ones can't.
And they proposed a solution.
Mentioned a bill they'd introduced to exempt small businesses from the tariffs.
And were there similar allegations about unfairness or special treatment?
Yes, claims that the administration grants exemptions to huge companies like Apple and Google through shady dealings, suggesting a kind of pay-to-play system based on contributions which small businesses obviously can't access.
What was the defense of the tariffs?
The counter-argument framed tariffs as part of a necessary, fair, and reciprocal trade strategy, targeting countries like China, Japan, South Korea, even Canada and Mexico over trade imbalances, and also linking it to border issues, specifically mentioning fentanyl deaths and demanding those countries secure their borders better.
And just like in the House record, the Senate excerpts also included detailed snippets of proposed legislative text on various other issues.
Yeah, we saw language-modifying rules around child pornography cases, victim restitution, reporting requirements for online providers, including penalties, and limits on sharing certain information.
And that stablecoin regulation we heard about earlier.
More details there, too. How federal and state laws would interact, potentially defining issuers as banks for certain rules like anti-money laundering, capital requirements, audits, also requirements for those crypto kiosks you see, and changes to financial crime rules.
And even text on fees for utility emissions.
Right. Proposals requiring utilities to report electricity consumption and greenhouse gas emissions for certain facilities, and then mandating fees starting in 2026 if their emissions are above a regional baseline.
And finally, for the Senate, the record noted how they wrapped up the day, setting the schedule for the next day, May 22nd.
Yeah, unanimous consent to adjourn and come back, with plans to vote on another resolution, HJ Res 88. Shows the legislative gears keep turning.
Okay, shifting away from the floor debates just briefly, the record also contains some other interesting congressional items, like a snapshot of the budget.
It did. High-level budget numbers from a House concurrent resolution, HCon Res 14. Billions of dollars in spending authority, outlays, revenues planned for 2025, and looking out over 5 and 10 years. It's that big-picture financial framework Congress operates within.
And the record wasn't all policy and procedure, was it? There was a more human element, too.
Absolutely. There were numerous personal tributes recognizing people. Dedicated staff, community leaders, veterans, first responders getting awards, volunteers, university presidents, even impressive young people. It's a good reminder that Congress is made up of people representing other people and their communities.
The House also observed a moment of silence.
Yes, in honor of the late Representative Gerald E. Connolly.
And with Memorial Day apparently nearing on the calendar at that time, there was mention of that too.
A call to remember fallen service members. celebrate their sacrifice. Even specific suggestions for families, like in Iowa, on how to honor the day, community events, visiting memorials, remembering local heroes.
Wow. Okay, so we've just walked through excerpts from a single day, May 21st, 2025, in the Congressional Record.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. We saw that massive House bill, H.R. 1, triggering intense, totally opposing arguments about its impact while revealing just how broadly it reached taxes, healthcare, energy, education, you name it.
And then that intricate procedural fight in the Senate over environmental rules and how Senate procedure itself works, alongside debates on everything from deepfakes and meme coins to global climate risk and trade policy.
Plus the budget context, the committee work, the personal recognitions.
It really underscores the sheer volume and the incredible breadth of what Congress deals with every single day, all captured in that official record.
And for you, listening, wading through even just these highlights, gives you a clearer picture, a shortcut maybe, to understanding how policy gets made, how governance actually functions.
You see how complex issues are debated often really fiercely, and how those technical-sounding procedural rules aren't just technicalities. They can be incredibly significant, shaping what's possible.
Yeah, that's a great point. And here's something to think about. Consider those completely opposing stories we heard about H.R. 1, who it helps, who it hurts, or that fundamental fight over Senate rules and the parliamentarian. These aren't just policy disagreements, are they?
No, they seem to reflect much deeper divisions, maybe different strategies, different visions entirely playing out in our political system. So the question for you is, how might paying attention not just to what Congress is debating, but how they're debating it, the procedures, the maneuvers, the language used, how might that deeper understanding help you anticipate future legislative battles and figure out their potential impact on your own life and community?
Something to definitely chew on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Congressional Record.